Lovecraft was wrong. Fear isn't the strongest emotion. Fear only causes 3 reactions: fight, flight, or freeze. Love, on the other hand, love is limitless and far more deadly. Nikki DeKister has also penned 2 books in the Bittersweet Empathy series, which follows Amy Doreen, an apathetic deviant suddenly struck with the ability to feel and manipulate people's emotions. At first, it's all in seemingly good fun, but the people she touches loses something of themselves and are never quite the same afterward, including Amy herself. Through blackouts, bleedovers, and the surety she's being watched, Amy must discover the horrifying truth behind her empathy before her 6th sense becomes her only sense. Available in Kindle Unlimited and paperback. See NikkiDeKister.com and PhoenixFeatherEdits.com for more.
Today's show is sponsored by Nikki DeKister with Phoenix Feather Edits. Phoenix Feather Edits offers uplifting and detailed support for your story. Each tale is unique, beautiful, and worth being told as only you can tell it. Nikki assists with shoring up structural, character, pacing, and plot elements as needed so that your story shines as brightly on the page as it does in your soul. Nikki specializes in developmental editing, manuscript evaluations, and outline critiques. Contact her for a free 1,000-word sample edit to see if she's the right fit for you and the story burning from your fingertips.
Your purpose is to make your audience see what you saw, hear what you heard, feel what you felt. On this episode of This Week in Indies, we'll be chatting about knowing your audience. Who do we create our projects for? How do we share our passion with those who are interested? We'll brainstorm over these ideas and more as we sit down at the round table with a group of creatives. Then we spend the final 5 minutes with a creative whose goal is to ignite passion using a variation of sound, art, theater, and more. Ashley Weckeser. So sit back, relax, and grab a cup of coffee. Let's get ready for this fantastic episode. Here's today's host, Madilynn Dale. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of This Week in Indies. We've got a great panel this morning for you guys. Well, afternoon, depending on where you're at. For me, it's still considered morning. I'm Madilynn Dale, the Chapter Goddess. You can find all my work at my website, thechaptergoddess.com. And without further ado, let's bring in our panel and let them introduce themselves. Hey, guys.
Hello.
So we're going to go around, starting with Ashley here, and kind of just go around and tell everyone who you are and a little bit about what you do.
Hi, I'm Ashley Weckeser. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I specialize in sound and music design, and as well as the visual arts.
Sweet.
I'm Sean. I'm SM Hillman professionally. I'm a speculative fiction writer, game designer, and that's it. And a couple other things here and there.
Yeah.
I am Jim Nettles, and it's kind of a long list. For purpose of this, I'm a science fiction, fantasy, genre author. I write a bunch of urban fantasy, horror, a bunch of other things. I also write a lot of nonfiction, We teach workshops on business for creatives, a lot of stuff like that. And I'm one of the founders over at the Continual Convention, where we do all the fun online stuff. And I'm sure that a few other things will come out as we're talking today.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. I'm Heather Lang, otherwise known as author Heather Fleischman or author J.R. Gansky. I primarily am in the science fiction and fantasy sector, and I've recently been broadening my horizons into helping new authors with promotions, marketing, branding, and design.
Nice. So, guys, and my puppy is back in the room, so I apologize if there's any barking. Let's start with telling our viewers about your audience. Since that's our topic today, is knowing your audience. Who wants to jump in first?
Oh, I
All
guess
right.
I will.
Oh, go for it, Heather.
My primary audience, I write for adults who may have learning disabilities or other things that prevent them from being able to read traditional authors' work. So I focus on simpler sentences. I focus on descriptive things that are easy to understand and easy to translate so that everybody can enjoy a good story.
Jim, you want to take it away?
So it's one of those things of because I write and I do a lot of work in a lot of different spaces, and my marketing is here. Bring up cool, cute puppies. Cute puppies will always bring way more attention than anything else. So my audience, it depends on which. So I mean, for example, with the workshops we do, my audience would be authors, it would be creators, it would be publishers, it would be people in the industry, writing science fiction, urban fantasy, stuff like that. Most of what I try to target there is going to be at least 13 and up, and some of it gets a lot more mature than that. I've done some YA, I've done kind of a cross spectrum, but it's more a matter of write the work and then know where you're going to target it. I've got a couple of series right now we're out trying to market and sell. And that's part of the discussion is, do we ramp it up or bring it back down a little bit based on the particular publisher? And so trying to learn to gauge who your audience is, you have to decide, is it going to be for you as the author, or are you going to go with a series or two and stick within a niche and a genre, which is what we usually tell people to do, versus what I do, which is more, I cover a lot of different spaces, which means I have a lot of different audiences. And then that means I have to target and identify how I'm going to get to all those different audiences. So that's one of those things I think we'll probably dive in today, is how do you really figure out who your audience is?
We definitely will be. So, Ashley, Sean, who wants to go next?
I can go next. It is a very interesting question for me because I feel like I'm very project-based as well. And so I can't pinpoint exactly who my audience is because it's very, very different based on every single project. And so as we discuss further of how we find our audience, I think that will apply a lot to my discipline as well.
Sweet. And Sean, I'm going to put you on the spotlight now.
Oh no. So I think it sort of going back to what everyone said, depending on which aspect of your career that you're working on. When it comes to fiction, I definitely like the sci-fi nerd and the sword and sorcery crowd, of which there are still people around who read that, as opposed to like epic fantasy or heroic fantasy. I'm not really into clean-cut heroes in that regard. When it comes to game design, it's pretty interesting, especially in light of recent events. Do you create things for a D&D crowd, or do you create things for the not D&D crowd? Or in our particular case, are you creating for an indie crowd? And a lot of my stuff in that goes in the indie direction, although I feel like I'm versatile enough to do it all. So I focus mainly on the indie gamer with the designs I'm working on.
And before we dive into the whole project basing, I'm going to do a shout out to those who are watching. Books by Tiffany's here. Anita is here. AL's here. And Holly Mistletoe is here. Just, hello, everyone, and Puppy, which Puppy is now in the hall. There's a cat in the background trying to play with him now. For those of you watching on Facebook, send a star to let our host and producers know how much you appreciate what they do here at GoIndieNow. Every time you contribute, you get entered into our season prize package drawing with gift cards, swag, and more. So definitely show us some love, guys. Most of you mentioned the whole project-based audience thing. Do you keep the audience in mind when you first start the project, or when does that come into play?
It depends. So there's the nice old trite saying that says, if you're trying to market to everyone, you're not marketing to anybody. And so it really depends. So if I'm doing a project for myself and I'm writing something, a lot of the time I'm getting out what the story is I want to do, or the project is I want to do. And then after that, you can tune when you're going through editing to figure out who's the better audience for the story you told. You know, do you need to ramp it up for a more adult audience? Do you want to tone it down a little bit more for a YA audience in, you know, urban fantasy and genre and that sort of thing? You know, especially in urban fantasy, do you want to ramp up the romance maybe a little bit to attract to that audience? So you have to tune it a little bit there with what you're doing. Other things, when I do stuff for more traditional publishing, sometimes you're given the scope, you're given the audience to write towards. Or you're given kind of that targeted market. So it really is an it depends sort of thing as to where you're going and who you're writing for. And are you doing it for yourself, which is predominantly the audience we've got out here for Go Indies. But if you're in traditional, then a lot of the time you really are operating within a certain degree of specs.
That's interesting.
I absolutely agree with Jim. I don't really realize who I am writing for until I'm either close to the end of the story or somewhere in the editing process. And then I'll go through and I'll decide, okay, am I going to keep the wording towards young adults? Am I going to keep the wording towards, you know, those 17 to 30? Am I going to, you know, go beyond that and continue with something that's more along the line of the learning disabled? So that all goes into, you know, my editing designs and how I go after the meat and potatoes of the story is actually complete.
I think that's very interesting because I feel a lot with music and sound design. I feel like that's kind of, I'm not necessarily writing for an audience and adapting words per se. I'm working with a different language, and it's kind of more of the questions I'm asking is how can I best share this project or this emotion with the audience? And so it's very interesting because it's a lot more universal and broad in that aspect because music reaches a very vast audience typically. And so when writing music, it's typically emotion based. It's how am I going to help the audience feel this specific way to help amplify the message, which the message is typically written by authors or producers. And so it's very interesting. It's like I'm trying to convey the emotions of which people are writing, if that makes sense.
Ooh, I like that.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
All right, so I'm going to stir up trouble.
Of course.
Yes.
So for music, and this is a conversation I've had with a couple of friends of mine that produce music for film and TV and stuff like that, is knowing, how do you go about knowing where your audience is at? Because the age and demographics of your audience really determine the music that often we're going to respond to, even if it's just a score. Because, you know, when you get old and decrepit, you don't have necessarily the same kind of flow of endorphins and things like that that will respond necessarily the same way, especially to new music, that you will if teenagers or 20s or 30s, where you get that immediate response. So I would still think there was a degree there of know your audience to tune that to the work. But maybe I'm just talking on my ass as usual. So
no, that's a really good question. And typically that's kind of established by, like, if we're going to talk about in terms of film, again, like if there's a film, there's a huge range of audience. Like we have youth to seniors watching the same movie. And so it's very difficult to figure out how, like, what audience you wish to pinpoint with that. And that's typically directed and portrayed by the producers. They have, I don't know, I feel like it's a very difficult thing to pinpoint because it is such a wide range. And so typically I work in emotions is kind of, because I find that emotions are quite universal. And yes, maybe some people have lower levels of dopamine, but like keep in mind that like the music is being, I guess it's working side by side with the visuals as well. And so the more senses that we can typically involve in storytelling helps create a more immersive experience that anybody can really get into.
Ooh, I like that.
I'll just say I have not retired from the mosh pits yet, so not yet. But it's interesting for me, speaking about emotion. Typically, one of the reasons I write is so I personally have a lot of issues being very emotionally distant in most of my relationships. So writing is one of the things I do with writing is I explore emotion in characters to try and sort of find or to and exploring my own emotional states as well. I noticed the other day that a lot of my characters are very emotionally distant. I'm like, no, they can't all be like you, Sean. You gotta give some of them the heart here and there. And so I think that in a subconscious level, I am hoping to sort of reach other people who either are emotionally distant like myself, or it, for me, it'd be a great success to move somebody with my writing. Not so much with gaming. I just want to kind of intrigue people, but with my writing, I'm definitely trying to, and this was mostly an unconscious thing for a while, generally trying to reach people emotionally, which is sort of the opposite of myself. So.
And I kind of I'm going to plug something in there because I've started utilizing like creating playlists and stuff to go with my stories and putting it at the back because a lot of those songs help me pull the emotions I need to out to put down on the paper because they're there, but sometimes getting into like the action scenes and stuff, like writing an action scene, like having a good song playing in the background, it just comes out a lot better than it does when it's not playing, Do you guys do anything like the playlist or anything, especially for like the gaming stuff? You could have a song like in the background.
So this is always a bit strange when I talk about this. When I was growing up gaming, so born in the 70s, but I became a teenager in the 80s, and I was gaming and doing some early design stuff. And so my game design playlist is Duran Duran, Billy Idol, Sade, some Madonna, and all this really 80s heavy music, which regardless of the genres or idioms I'm using, in my head, I associate 80s pop and rock with game design. When it comes to writing the other stuff, I have some of those songs, but I like to listen to a lot of ambient music when I write, depending on the kind of story I'm writing. So like I'll listen to the Eve, those who know what Eve Online is. The soundtrack for the game is fantastic. So I will put that on when I'm writing space opera, for instance. And that kind of helps me groove on that.
Ooh, I like it.
I don't really have like a set playlist, but depending on where I'm at, I can put a song on repeat for 8 hours and completely lose myself in telling a story. So, some of the more popular ones that have gotten me through like my first couple of novels was like the Evanescence Fallen CD. I had on repeat for that. I had Nightwish. I had CCR. I had Aerosmith. I had just this huge setup of it didn't come from one particular genre. It came from everywhere. And I think you can really see that in a lot of my stories because the first 2 novels I wrote, this heroine of the story was just out in space. She didn't want to be the hero. She didn't want to do anything other than be left alone. So, to have all of these different conflicting things inside of one person is really reflected on how I write.
Yeah, because I'll use music if I'm outlining, but a lot of the time if I'm writing, I can't. I used to pull in a lot more music to help set tone and things like that. And if I can't, if I'm having an issue with tone, I'll start pulling music out to help set a mental tone. And then when I sit down to write, I'm cranking. But because so often I'm working on stuff in bursts or in between things, I don't necessarily set that. But I will use music for a couple of things. If I'm outlining and trying to go through the full story arc, I'll pull music in to set tone scene by scene as I'm setting outlines and maybe doing high level, scene sketches and things like that to set tone. And if I'm on the torch, if I'm playing with glass, blowing glass and things like that, I will crank some loud stuff because that gets the creative work going. But if I'm actually sitting down and writing or God forbid editing, then I'm looking these days more like just I want it quiet. I just want it quiet, or I've got some ambient stuff that'll run in the background to drown out the.
Yeah. So I have another curious question about the audience. Like, do you guys use almost like an avatar or create this image of a person that your audience kind of like sums up? Tell me like what you plug into that person. Like who? Jim, you
That's
wanna go
where
first?
J.R. Gansky came from, because I'd written underneath Heather Fleischman for so many novels. I'm like, I need a fresh perspective. So I took a couple of different stories. I put it underneath my husband's name. I decided, I was going to make his name famous and he could bite me later. So, I started writing underneath this, and it gave me the opportunity to come out at a different audience and at a different level, and to just, test the waters to see, what was life like writing outside of the specifics that I had been writing in for, 14 years.
So that's actually one of the classes I teach, is a full thing about how to build a reader avatar.
Yeah.
And so the kind of the very high level of it for me is, and it's a lot of it is very data driven. And so there's a couple of things that go into it. Is if you've been writing for a while, you've been cranking out books, you've got some idea at least, or you should, if you've been out hand selling, if you've been at conventions, if you've been interacting online with people and whatnot, if you look at the people that are following you on social media and whatnot, you can start to get some idea there. But the best data you're going to get, there's a couple things. You can use demographic data by averages, by genres, because there's a lot of that information is available to break down and start doing the really hard demographics about who readers are, age ranges, economics, education. There's a whole list of demographics you can kind of work by genre to start with. And then the easiest way to really start to narrow it down is look at your marketing data. So if you then go, you can use things like Google Trends and put in keywords and pull a tremendous amount of data to look at who those interests are, what the common interests are. There's a lot of tools you can use, like a Publisher Rocket or something, to look at competing books to get ideas of keywords. But it becomes really a data process as much as it is creating the personality. Because we all get to know a couple of super fans, people that love what we're doing. And a lot of the time they're a really good starting point and a really good model, but we have to also be really careful not to get lost in them and to start looking at, real data. And again, this is where me being a tech guy comes in, a lot of the things that we do, but you can get real hard data. And I will tell you frequently when we do this for people, they're shocked at who their customers actually are versus who they think they are.
Ooh, that is interesting. Ashley, do you do something similar for your music?
Honestly, I don't think I've ever done that for music.
Yeah.
And like I'm sitting here thinking and listening, I'm like, oh, I wonder how that would affect my composition process if I did create an avatar. It's very new to me, actually.
And Books by Tiffany adds, she just pictures herself and like what they want to read. Anita says, Publisher Rocket is so helpful. I'm going to have to look into Publisher Rocket from Tiffany. So Anybody else want to share their avatar, Sean?
Well, my avatar's a lot cooler than I am.
Nothing wrong with that. I
No,
mean,
there's nothing wrong with
it's
that.
supposed to represent your audience. So
Right. And I feel like, on the one hand, there's nothing inauthentic. And I don't know that I have enough readers to be able to judge necessarily the data yet. Although I definitely will be contacting Jim when I think I have enough readers. But I try to be authentic. I think that's important, right? If you were to come up to me and say, "Oh, you're that guy," I would be that guy, just a little less cool, maybe, than than the avatar is. And I think that authenticity, while very important, I wonder, because I don't have data necessarily on that. I wonder how that affects readers and reader, because I feel like in some of the places I write, I'm not like the other people, and I wonder how that might affect an audience going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, you don't have to have your own data. I mean, if you've got it, that puts you further ahead of the game. But if you don't have data, there's still a lot of ways to get to it, to at least give you a starting point. And I mean, that's kind of the thing. But at the end of the day, we all write for ourselves anyway.
pretty much. I mean,
Yeah.
if you don't like what you're creating, your
I
passion's not
have
in it. So,
totes and totes full of stuff that I never finished. So if you don't like it, you just let it go and move on, in my case.
yeah. And JD is joining us. He says, "Happy Sunday, my friends." Pirate, you moved you. And been a busy old couple of weeks. That it has. We were talking about
Yes.
that before the show. So Jim, you mentioned some of the demographics that go into it. Let's say we were creating our first avatar for an audience or a book or a project we're working on. What are some of the things you guys would use to create your audience avatar?
The first thing is going to be trying to figure out who, in other words, I'd be looking for comps. In other words, if I'm starting from ground zero, this is my first book, I have no audience, I have no nothing, is figure out who your comps are. Because if you're an author, you should be reading a lot both in and out of your genre.
Mm-hmm.
So you should have some idea as to style wise, content wise, who's interested in it, at least at a very high level. So the first thing you start looking for is comps. And I was with Patrick Dugan last weekend, and this is kind of an interesting thing. He's got a new book coming out, which is a fairy heist cyberpunk novel. And we were going through who is the market for this. And by the time we got down to it, there were literally only 3 comps, and he was one of them already. So there was only 2 others, and we know one of the 2 people because she's also a Falstaff author. He's like, so in other words, I've written a book for no audience at all. I'm like, no. Now we start breaking it down. Let's start looking at comps. Let's look at cyberpunk heists. We've got a bunch of stuff out here that would be, comparable. Fairy and folklore heists. Okay, we see a bunch of stuff right out here that's comparable. Now we can look at fairy folklore and cyberpunk. Let's look at that triangle. Just because there's not direct comps doesn't mean that you can't work through and figure out who writes in that space. And now we've been playing through a lot of data of, okay, well, let's go run an ad. So we spent about 4 hours sitting the other night, just sitting there and going through and analyzing comps and then pulling through trend data and going through this. So one thing I'm going to say is if you want to build a solid avatar, it's going to take you time. But once you have them, it's an extremely valuable resource. Now, if you're in other spaces like romance, if you're writing romance and you know what you're writing cozies versus you're writing historicals versus you're writing, then it's a lot easier because there's a ton of marketing data that's already out there and available without spending a bunch of hours. But if you're starting with something and you don't know where you're starting, the first place I would actually start is look at Amazon. Just look at the other authors that are writing stuff and look at who Amazon says that their comps are. This person, the person that bought this book also read or also liked these. The also boughts, great data.
Mm-hmm.
So you can start trending things that way to look at and figure out who the comps are. The second big tool, and that I already mentioned, was Google Trends. So you can go out there, get a freebie account, and start looking through that data. And really, the third big piece that you can use if you're going through it is go and set up an ads account on Facebook. You're going to if you've never run an ad on Facebook or you've never run an ad on social media, go ahead and be disturbed by exactly how you're already profiled and get over it. And you can start. Oh yeah, if that's not the conversation today, we'll start the conversation about how evil data and social media is. But again, remember, on social media, the entire reason is to gather data about you to market to you. There are tremendous profiles built around you. Go create a Facebook ad and start looking at the guidance that the data will give you, and then start running small segments of ads and see what kind of responses you get and what the algorithm then says. Oh, because you like these 5 things, now we know which circles and which pools to put you in. You can't target as well as you used to be able to because of the new pooling system. You can't get down and target one individual person in a house anymore. You used to be able to do that. But with the pools and stuff like that, if you run a couple of ads, it will tell you pretty quickly and pretty cheaply.
Yeah. It could be creepy how much they know about you. So, which the same could be used for.
And Madelynn's gone. All right, now we can take over the panel.
I know. Everyone's down.
All right, so who's next? I've been rambling.
Not sure how I managed that. So the same. I was just like all of a sudden like, okay, my computer didn't want me to talk. Here we go.
It was not my fault. I was not behind that one.
Totally on my end. That's what I get for having one cat in the room. Wonky things happen. He's mad now. So the same could be used for other creative outlets too, with music and everything. You could utilize that stuff to find your audience, right?
You can use it for anything.
Yeah.
This is exactly how when we do for an entirely separate project, because I'm working with somebody, we're building a marketing system that goes and pulls tremendous amount of data. It's an aggregator system. We're building a much larger version of this that actually will go through and pull in this exact kind of data, aggregate it, do analytics, gives you hashtags, keys, marketing data off the back end of that. And it's designed to be an agency tool. So this is exactly the same sort of process, just it's more powered by analytics and AI, or business intelligence. I'm not going to throw the AI word out there, but business intelligence to do these kinds of things.
Yeah.
So it works for anything.
Sweet. So Ashley, what is some of the research you've done to find your audience? Like, do you have like somebody that inspired you that you've kind of like built an ideal audience on?
Basically any film composer or composer for video game I look up to. And so I guess a lot of my audience is generally based around people who enjoy listening to soundtrack music. I definitely have not dived into the pop realm of things. That is definitely not my strength. But yeah, and when I do research, essentially it's just I make like massive playlists of just all the soundtrack music I can find, and I try to get into forums, groups, everything. So it's very vague. Yeah.
Well, that sounds like utilizing the forums and stuff to find more data and information to plug in. That's genius. Like, anybody else, do you do something like that?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the evil. That's part of the reason social media works, is creating communities.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I have several writer communities that I've found over the years, and, none of them beats Joe's community because, he was my first. But you get out there and you meet these people and you see, everybody that's just, I'm not an author. I just wrote something and put it on paper and I want your opinion, to I've got 25 done in the last 25 years. What do you want to say to me now? Type people. And you get out there and you get this experience and you watch these people as they communicate and they trade these stories. And I'm a little stalker when it comes to some of these groups, because I will read it and read it and read it, and I will never post. So, it gives me all these things to look back on and think about over the years.
Yeah.
And Joe is so gentle, just so gentle. Oh wait,
Oh.
I've not had enough
I
caffeine
had to
this
take
morning.
that. I mean, because my mind instantly dropped into the gutter with that too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, JD. Like, I mean,
No, you don't, JD. And he did a lot to bring me into the community, because I was one of those people that was like, I don't want the attention. That wasn't me. I didn't do it. And, I was just hiding in the background. I had somebody else running my website. I had somebody else running my artwork. I had somebody else, sharing the books everywhere that they went. Occasionally I'd drop a handful off at a public library, but I wasn't really in the spotlight until, I got around other people that weren't afraid to be in the spotlight.
mm-hmm. He says, "Hello, hey, we're tag teaming your gutter brains." Yeah. So,
Recipe for
Not the first
disaster.
time.
yeah. So if we take, I lost my train of thought. Thanks, JD. Like, flew down the water. Using some of the stuff we get off of ads and everything, do you feel like that's the best way to kind of target your audience, or is there other methods that you feel work better?
I actually went to college for this, because it was irritating me so much that I let everybody else have the control. I wanted to do the promotions, I wanted to do the design, I wanted to do the marketing. So I went in and I took a certification in graphic design. So
Ooh.
I went and I did all that. And then I'm like, okay, I get that. Now I want to know the coding. And I want to know the coding and the design. And now, 5.5 years later, I am in my master's with concentration in marketing, because there are so many different pieces to this that I've just gotten so excited to learn it and so excited to be a part of it, that, my next steps are, I want to make this information more readily available to people so they don't drop 60 grand into college, because not everybody, will be able to do something with that in the future.
Yeah. We won't talk about student loans. I have a vast amount of student loan debt.
And believe it or not, that's after a full ride scholarship for 5 years.
Oh, yeah.
That's all I had to pay out of pocket. So I got
Scholarships
lucky.
don't even touch part of it anymore.
Yeah.
So,
but the important thing is the information is out there. You don't have to. I was in a different generation. I was right there on the edge of, we have computers at home, we can do all this sorting, we can do all this stuff on our phone. So I was at a learning curve already, because I was behind on the technology. People had cell phones long before I did. So, I decided to go the college route, and I decided to go the learning route instead of, that self-teaching and learning through other people's experience.
yeah, it's hard to do that. So, but
And being somebody who does it professionally, you can't do it all. You just can't. You cannot stay current on everything that's going on. That's why you have people that specialize in given things and are able to stay current with a lot of different things.
And that's exactly why the last couple of years, my writing itself has been, taken the back burner, because my main focus has turned more towards the aspects of the content after writing.
Yeah. And got a couple comments on that stuff. I could so improve results, but there are no F's given. A lot of fun is keeping people guessing. I think my avatar would be the Riddler. Ooh. Naming the avatar is a whole other ballgame. Because I love school. I miss school except math.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one. I am in my 9th week of accounting. I had to take accounting 1 and accounting 2. So 16 weeks of math. I mean, my brain is already mush, and I'm not even close to done with it yet.
Yeah. But how do you organize the information you gather to build your audience focus? Like, what are some tips there that you guys have used? Do you write it down? Do you make a document of it?
It's go ahead, Sean.
I was just gonna say, I don't actually write it down. I keep it in my head, especially on the game design side, where there are so many different communities and things like that. I probably should write it down, but it's for the moment I just sort of keep it in the back of my mind, and pull out whatever piece of information I need with regard to the project I'm doing, the project that's right in front of me.
Ooh.
That's not really a tip. It's maybe a cautionary tale.
I was a seat of my pants kind of writer, but after, the first 12, I decided that I was going to start, making notes and having, these different documents so that I could have everything there in my notes and have my main focus on, the writing side of things so that I could bounce back and forth between the two a lot easier the older I got and the more I got into, the depths of writing and the depths of, meeting some of my fans and talking about different aspects of, what I wrote and how I wrote and, how they read it versus how I wrote it. And to get into a situation like that, I think is more valuable than notes. I think the one-on-one with some of the people that are our fans is a great big help.
Yeah. Ashley, you got any thoughts on that? How do you keep up with stuff like that?
Again, that's a very interesting question for me because I feel like I'm very new in terms of being an artist, and so I don't think I have too much of a. I guess I have an audience that's mostly friends and family at this point, and I know them very well. But I guess I'm a very visual person, and so when I am working on a project and I'm trying to figure out the audience or the message I'm trying to convey, I love mood boards. Just getting concept art for the project. I love concept art so much. It's so fun. And other music tracks that have a similar style or theme or instrumentation that I would like to try to add to my track or try to replicate a little bit. But yeah, I'm very visual in that aspect.
Ooh, I like it. Yeah,
So
I have to write things down for sure. So
you know what I'm going to say. We have templates. We build models. We build the data. And I will tell you, because again, I teach a lot of classes, teach a lot of workshops. I do a lot of talks, and it's a lot. And I've had people go and say, "Well, this is a lot of work." Yeah, but if you spent months or years working on a book, and you're not then ready to spend a fraction of those hours knowing who you're going to sell it to, it's not going to go anywhere. And that's kind of one of those harsh truth things. I just had to have that conversation with somebody not long ago. It was like, "Oh, well, the book's out, so where's the miracle?" And I'm like, you now have to go marketing. You have to go do all these things. And the nice part about having, and again, I absolutely admit there are times that I swag a bunch of stuff. There's times that absolutely can pants certain things. There are aspects of my avatars that I write to that I can sit and have a conversation with. They're in my head. They're just like a character. They're one of the other voices in my head. But for them to really be useful, you've got to be able to track them over time and document what works and what doesn't, because that's how you refine and keep your ad spend down. That's how those mechanics are going to change over time. And if you can't track those mechanics over time and be a little bit of a data nerd, and it's really not that much data, but to go check the box, it says, if I add this lookalike audience, my ad price just doubled. If I can't go and say that this person in terms of space doesn't bring any data to me, do I need to understand who they are, why I put them in as a lookalike audience? If you aren't keeping track of what works and what doesn't, you're going to replicate the same mistakes over and over again because you don't know if it's working or not. And that's where the evil part of me comes out and says, if you're not keeping track of the things that you do, then you're gonna waste a lot more time than it would take to build it the first time and keep them updated. I know it's not as much fun, it's not as sexy, but again, this is where I also preach from the aspect of if you're doing this and you're doing this to make money, that's part of the business.
There's no shortcuts.
Yeah.
And none. And one of my main things when I first started was I printed through Lulu because I could get like 100 books for $30. So I could go and I could give them out. It wasn't about making money. It was about getting my name out there and getting opinions of what they liked, what they didn't like, so that I could start to learn from the reader's perspective, not just from the writer's perspective.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. And we're going to take a pause break real quick. We normally have an indie connection here, guys. But since we've got JD hanging out in the comments, I'm going to pull it up while he's here. But like, he also says, I have a different audiences and I should try to understand better. Curiously, some people only read poetry or only fantasy or only nonfiction, and the age, gender, country of origin vary widely. That's so crazy. But that works for me in PR. Stateside, I think that can come off as scatterbrained, which isn't far from the truth. And he says, love the angry goose background. No shortcuts at all, though countless ways of making the route longer. Since he's hanging out with us, JD has a thing going on this month that we are trying to encourage participation in. It is called March of the Writers, and there is a different prompt for each day. It's kind of just a fun thing to do, like just have a lot of fun with it. So far we have, here's a list of the prompts. New month, who dis? You could do that today if you wanted to. But like in the coming week, we've got shelf consciousness. I am, therefore I write. Trio, 3 favorite movies, albums, books. Drive you very much. Secret identity, it's all true, and then just so on from that. You can find a description of these on JD's blog, which is jdestradarwriter.blogspot.com. And it kind of gives you a little more detail about what each topic entails and stuff. And it's been a lot of fun. Like, you actually get to learn a lot more about your creative buddies when doing this. And you can take, instead of it being writing, like music or movie design or anything, you know. And Anita says, just designed my last batch of March of the Writers picks for Instagram this morning. Yeah, I got to do that too. So, but yeah, kind of a fun way to engage your audience a little bit with some fun creative stuff, especially with social media being like one of our top used things these days. TikTok, you know, and does all the videos. JD says, if you've ever done Author Life Month, it's in that vein. But what do you guys do when you create something and your project is published and you realize you made the mistake of putting it towards a different audience and it's going toward another one? What do you do when that happens?
I actually pulled one of my stories. I pulled it and I completely redesigned a cover, and I redesigned, you know, the format and the promotions and the marketing, because I didn't realize that I had a broader audience than I did when I wrote it. So I pulled it and I redesigned it, and then I put it back out underneath my new author name, where it ended up going much better than it did underneath my old author name. Cool. So it was a matter of just stepping back and understanding that I'm not going to get it right all the time, and not be afraid to just pull it and redraft it and redo it, because that's the only way that you're going to learn and that you're going to be able to retarget where you need to be.
Yeah, I mean, Heather's got it right. You experiment. Because from an indie perspective, you've got all the control. So there's times that the one of the things that gets us in trouble is that idea of the sunk cost fallacy of, oh, well, I spent money on the cover, I'm going to ride that cover out. If the cover's not doing anything for you, change it. You know, if the artwork's not doing anything for you, change it. if you see that something is skewing in a different direction, or something is giving you certain feedback, then change and go towards the direction that's working. I mean, that's reach the audience that you're finding. And if you can change that up and grow the audience and build on it, then that's really the right approach.
Anybody? Sean, Ashley, you want to add into that?
I feel like that's pretty, I would agree with that. And I think too that being a reader, you have to think about yourself as a reader. This is where being a reader helps. Is it's like, okay, what do I mean, we talk all the time about write the book that you would want to read. So I think there's a certain degree of that into it as well. And if you're looped in with reader communities, you might get a sense of what they like and what they need to do, and that would be helpful as well.
Ashley, thoughts?
I don't think I have any thoughts for this one. Sorry.
I'm still kind of new into the game too, so like my audience stuff I'm still figuring out. And JD actually just posted in the comments, if your cover photo is showing up on countless threads because it's royalty free, change it. Which, that's a very good tip.
I actually have I have Daz Studio. I have all the Adobe software, and I all the stuff that I brought with me through college, because I had to go in and pay for this software, and I had to go and pay for these downloads. So I kept them, so I can pull images and I can combine images and I can, completely redraft it, because I'm the one that knew what was in my head to start with.
Yeah.
So, sometimes it's just easier to find a point to start from and discover it yourself. Because even if you're just doing a draft to take to an artist or somebody that's going to do this for you, having a basic sketch and a basic knowledge of how this design is done and how it can be transformed is going to help out so much more when you're going into the marketing aspect. Because when you turn around and you just let somebody design it and somebody says, well, why'd you do it this way? And you're like, I don't know, that was my artist. I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
You can get yourself caught in these little traps. So, try to make yourself more available to understand, at least a little bit of where you're going and what you're doing and where you want to be.
Yeah. And even if you're paying somebody to create a cover, shouldn't, like, the ones I've worked with ask for a little bit of information of what the story is about and the characters, like where you're going with it. I would hope they would ask that, right?
Yeah, the best artists I've ever worked with, it's like, give me an inspiration, give me an idea. The first cover I had on what's now Pandora's Curse, the original cover on it, I had an idea, and the cover that I wound up giving was a great cover. It was just a little too romancy. It was a little too action adventure romancy. And I was talking, because again, it's not YA, but it's on the younger end of urban fantasy for that series, other than the body count. Now later ones get a little older, but when I went to the second book, I was working with an artist that started doing charcoal sketches and then did digital inking. And we were playing with ideas. And I said, I said, there's an idea I've had in my head, and I laid it all out. I said, but there's a joke in my head because of a particular scene. Is I have this idea of a dragon smoking a cigar and leaning against the treasure chest like a bar. And she was like, I can work with that. And what came back was just glorious. And that was the covers on that for a number of years. And then unfortunately she quit. So then I had to go recover everything because we still had the series going. But yeah, I'm used to creating at least briefs for an idea, and also some stylistic comps, not necessarily, but some stylistic comps, because we do that with one of the publishers I do work with. We kind of will do some of the stylistic comp type of thing as well.
He says that's a hell of an idea, Jim. The cigar smoking dragon. I just picture you and Joe having a conversation in dragon form. So.
You've seen Joe and I have a conversation.
I know.
At late hours.
Oh my gosh, guys. Well, do you guys have any final thoughts about knowing your audience?
I think it's important to know yourself. And then once you understand yourself, just look where you want to go from there, because your audience is there and your audience is waiting, and you just have to be open to it.
Spend the time. I mean, it takes some time, it takes some research, and when you kind of start figuring it out, always be refining it. I mean, it's just part of the process. I mean, it may not be the most fun part of the process, but uh-huh,
I love that. Y'all should definitely get a pic of that and have someone draw that.
uh-huh. Thanks, JD. Um, but yeah, I mean, spend some time, as you figure out who they are, you're always going to be refining, because here's the other nasty truth. It's always going to be changing. Tastes change, people change, markets change. So you have to keep up.
Yep.
I think
Ashley,
also,
Sean? Sorry.
yeah, no worries. I think not, I guess going along with Heather, like knowing yourself is also not being afraid to be genuine and being fearless enough to show that side to your audience, because I personally, I want an audience that reflects me, like, and like that I can also draw inspiration from an audience. That's kind of like a relationship where we inspire each other. I think that that's an audience, like that's how I want my interactions with audience to go, because I feel like that's just a beautiful community, and I think a lot of incredible things can come from that. And so that's what I'm trying to strive for. I'm definitely not there yet, but
No, I don't know if I necessarily have anything to add on to what the others have said, other than also don't be afraid to try new things. Right? I feel like the whole marketing thing is scary for some people, but I believe that you at least need to understand what you're doing, even if you're putting it in somebody else's hands. And it's not a bad thing to rethink about your writing or your music or your game design, uh, as people, like, as we mentioned, people's trends or people's tastes change. It's not a bad thing to reevaluate yourself and your own tastes, to kind of propel you forward.
Yeah. And I'm going to plug A.L. Mingle's comment in here. He says, I write for my journey and others are invited along for the ride. So, like, that's a great little, that needs to be like a quote. So, all right, guys, we're going to go back around the table and let our viewers know where they can find you. And yeah, so we're going to start with Heather.
All right, guys, you can find me on enchantinglyentangled.com. That will have access to my Facebook and all of my other profiles. But that's basically where my stories are and where the beginning of my journey is to help other people. So I will see you all on the other side.
Yeah. Thank you for being on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Jim.
Well, the easiest place to find me is jamespnettles.com. If you're interested in workshop stuff, we're finally relaunching this week all the workshop stuff at authoressentials.net and the workshops company. If you are in the North Carolina area or want to be, Saga Writers Conference is next weekend. I'll be one of the instructors there at Saga next weekend on the business side of things. Obviously, on the Continual channel, on continualconvention.com. Yeah, that thing. We do a lot of panels. We talk a lot about book marketing and stuff like that too. And my show last week on creating prose was a mini workshop talking about how you can start to go build this kind of marketing data like we've been talking about today. It's one of the marketing models you can actually use to go and gather the information.
Thanks for being on the show today, Jim.
Of course. Thank you.
Sean?
You can go to wickedboys.com. You'll find my blog. You'll find links to my writing, especially the 3 Vela stories I've got. So please feel free to go and check that out. And I also am active as a con volunteer. So Jordan Con, April 21st to the 24th, I think. If I got that wrong, they'll kill me. And later in the year, in October, Multiverse. I think it's the second weekend. I really should have had this ready beforehand, but multiverse.org, jordancon.org. I'll also be at Con Carolinas as a guest, my first guest appearance as an author later this summer, or June, not late this summer, June.
First weekend in June. Yep.
June. Yep.
Well, thank you for being on the show today, Sean.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, before I turn it over to Ashley for the final 5, I want to just give you a rundown this week. First off, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already. GoIndieNow, we have a ton of stuff coming up this week, from meme reviews, character-driven. Can't think of the rest off the top of my head because it's been one of those days. There's a lot going on. There is always a lot going on in GoIndieNow. But for me, I'm Madilynn Dale. You can find links to all my books, my blog, social media, all on thechaptergoddess.com. If I can get my fingers, there we go, right. Check out my blog, subscribe to my newsletter. My newsletter subscribers kind of get early stuff. So if books are coming out, hint, hint, I do have one coming. They get early access to that and gets to do beta reading and ARC readers way earlier, and also my Facebook group as well. But make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and I am going to turn it over to our lovely guest for the final 5 minutes, and she is going to share with us a little bit about what she does. So take it away, Miss Ashley.
Thank you. So what you've gathered so far, I am a music composer. That's my primary interest. It is a dream of mine to compose for film. Maybe eventually replace Hans Zimmer. We'll see. That would be amazing. But yeah, I think as an artist, my primary focus is storytelling. I love telling stories. And I find that through music and art, stories are so immersive and they are so impactful. Like they're beautiful things that can even be pivotal moments for people in their lives. Like they can be life-changing. I've had my life changed through stories, and it's just something I find inspiring and I love to create. You can follow a lot of my projects or my explorations or adventures on my website. It's aweckeser.com, or you can follow me on Instagram as well, which is a.weckeser. I think a great way to, I guess, present myself would be through the video that I sent to Madilynn to share. It's of my latest release. It's just a single of instrumental music, and I'm really trying to explore the concept of telling stories through music, which is very interesting because you're using a very different language. You're not using words. And we will listen to that now. That song is called Undying, and I hope that it transported you at least a little bit. It can be found on your music streaming platforms of choice, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube Music. If you look up, my artist name on that is a.weckeser, and you'll be able to find a lot of my other musical creations. Thanks so much for having me on the show. It's always a time to go indie now.